What happens when a so-called undesirable mail-order bride arrives in a dusty Texas town, only to be judged too quickly by everyone she meets? Harriet Baker finds herself dismissed by suitors who see only her fuller figure, never the bold spirit that drives her to help her family back east. Day by day, her hopes for a new beginning dim. That is until a wealthy ranch owner discovers her hidden talent for taming even the wildest horse. Their unlikely bond sparks talk in the town's gossip mills, and soon Harriet faces a choice between returning home in defeat or stepping into the unknown with a man who sees her real worth. If you're curious about how Harriet's courage changes, not only one ranch but an entire community, you'll want to stay with us until the story's dramatic final turn. And hey, while you're here, don't forget to subscribe. By doing so, you'll never miss out on inspiring tales that prove real love looks deeper than appearances, and that second chances can blossom in even the harshest frontiers. Harriet Baker stared at the ragged newspaper clipping on her dressing table, smoothing its edges for what felt like the 100th time. The advertisement read, "Seeking upright, resilient women of good moral standing to wed reputable gentlemen in Redwood Bluff. Texas must be prepared for frontier conditions. Clergy or employer reference required." Even now, months after first reading it, Harriet felt her pulse flutter at the possibility it promised. She sat in a cramped Boston apartment where the taste of uncertainty lingered in every room. Her father, Thomas, fought a lingering illness that drained both his strength and the family's savings. Her mother, Lucy, anxiously hovered with worry in her eyes. Harriet was no stranger to work. Since she was a teenager, she'd toiled as a seamstress, sitting at her table day in and day out, guiding cloth under the needle with meticulous care. It provided food on the table, but never quite covered mounting medical bills. As her father's cough deepened and the doctor's visits grew frequent, Harriet realized she needed a more drastic solution. The battered advertisement unearthed from an old friend's trunk seemed like a life raft. She read it again. Redwood Bluff, somewhere in the wide, sun-scorched expanses of Texas. A different world from Boston's busy streets and steepled skylines. In a carefully penned letter to Mrs. Lyman, the proprietress of the only boarding house in Redwood Bluff, Harriet introduced herself. She admitted her figure was fuller than society's fashion plates might celebrate, and that she owned neither jewels nor illusions of grandeur. She enclosed a modest photograph that depicted her just as she was, wide-hipped, solemn-eyed, with dark hair that resolutely defied any attempt at taming. She refused to hide behind flattering illusions. If someone was to accept her in marriage, they would do so with eyes open. As Harriet folded the letter, she recalled her father pressing a train ticket into her hand, just in case he'd told her, tears in his eyes. Though the family's funds were nearly gone, Thomas insisted Harriet keep that ticket for a possible return journey to Boston if her bold plan failed. Lucy, softly weeping, could barely manage goodbyes. Weeks passed with no reply, and Harriet braced herself for disappointment. Then at last, an envelope arrived. In neat script, Mrs. Lyman welcomed Harriet to Redwood Bluff, explaining she had corresponded with several respectable gentlemen who might take interest. Frontier life was not easy, she cautioned, but Harriet's letters suggested resilience, and Redwood Bluff needed exactly that. For Harriet, the letter was a lifeline. The day she boarded the train west was a blur, tearful farewells at the station. Lucy's arms wrapped around Harriet in a last-minute embrace. Thomas's pained smile from a bench where he sat trembling with fatigue. Then the locomotive hissed. Harriet stepped into the carriage, and the city she'd always known began to recede into memory. Endless miles of track-changing landscapes, the prairies unrolling under a vast sky. She pressed her face to the window, imagining Redwood Bluff's dusty streets and the unknown faces who would soon weigh her worth. She arrived travel-worn and anxious, greeted by a swirl of desert dust and warm, dry air that felt like stepping into an oven. Women in bonnets and men in broad-brimmed hats lingered by the station, curious about the newcomer. A tall, spare woman approached, introducing herself as Mrs. Lyman. The lodging house operator's handshake was firm, and her voice brimmed with the forthrightness Harriet had discerned in her letters. As Harriet lifted her chin and followed Mrs. Lyman to a painted wagon waiting to carry her trunk, she silently prayed that Redwood Bluff would offer the second chance she so desperately needed. The next morning, Harriet rose to find Redwood Bluff's main street bathed in early sunlight. From her second-floor window at Mrs. Lyman's boarding house, she watched with mixed trepidation and hope as townspeople went about their lives. A blacksmith hammered out a rhythm that set roosters cackling. A ranch hand rode in from the outskirts, dust swirling behind him. This was the place she was meant to forge a future if fate allowed. Breakfast at Mrs. Lyman's proved a modest but comforting affair. Biscuits, eggs, and coffee that tasted of frontier resilience. Over the meal, Harriet met the other boarders. Miss Gladys Porter, the town's school teacher, peered at Harriet with an inquisitive squint. Mr. Roland Tucker, the telegraph operator, tipped his hat but quickly averted his eyes in embarrassment. A widow named Mrs. Green quietly observed everything from the corner, uttering few words yet missing nothing. "3 men have agreed to meet you soon," Mrs. Lyman said, her tone both encouraging and pragmatic. "Mr. Hardwick, who runs the bank, Mr. Noble from the Mercantile, and Mr. Oliver, who prints the Redwood Gazette." Each name prickled Harriet's sense of nervous anticipation. She'd never approached romance as though it were an employment interview. Yet here she was, an object of scrutiny by practical-minded men seeking a wife for reasons that ranged from housekeeper to hostess. Her first encounter set the tone. Mr. Hardwick arrived with a stiff collar and an even stiffer demeanor. He took a single glance at Harriet, offered a few clipped pleasantries, and excused himself back to the bank. Harriet read the disappointment and distaste in his eyes, like black ink on white paper. She tried to keep her composure as he left, swallowing the pain with her lukewarm coffee. Mr. Noble stayed a bit longer, evidently curious about Harriet's ability to keep accounts. He asked about her sewing skills, her cooking repertoire, but never once looked directly into her eyes. His polite but distant conversation lingered just long enough for Harriet to realize he was being more diplomatic than genuinely interested. When he rose to leave, she recognized a practiced sigh of relief escape him. Then there was Mr. Oliver bustling in with grand gestures and an air of self-importance. He smelled of cologne that clung to him in an invisible cloud. "An editor must have a wife who can engage Redwood Bluff's finest," he announced, scanning Harriet from head to toe with the unabashed eye of a critic. Harriet answered his questions dutifully, though each one felt like an interrogation. He seemed determined to find a flaw that validated his assumptions. Eventually, with a half-hearted compliment about her refined manner, he took his hat and departed. By dusk, Harriet had faced a day's worth of dashed hopes. The suitors she'd met took less than an hour in total to dismiss her. She retreated to her small room, feeling the stares of Redwood Bluff in the pit of her stomach. People whispered in the parlor. She heard them. "She's not what they were expecting, is she? Certainly not slender or dainty. Maybe she'll do as a ranch wife somewhere." Those words stung more than she cared to admit. In the dim lamp glow, Harriet unpacked her trunk, not wanting to appear perpetually ready to flee. She laid out her few dresses, the carefully folded letter from her parents, and at the bottom the envelope containing the train ticket that could take her back east. Already she sensed Boston's cobblestone streets receding in her memory, overshadowed by Redwood Bluff's dusty roads and challenges. For a moment, Harriet wondered whether she'd made a mistake. But a flicker of resolve guided her to remember her father's ailing body, her mother's worn gaze, and the desperate need for something better. She resolved to endure at least until she was certain every avenue had closed. A few more days passed, bringing a parade of men mostly unimpressed with Harriet. A middle-aged rancher with 4 young children blinked uncertainly at her full figure, then mumbled something about manageable housekeeping. A farrier in the prime of life seemed charmed by her gentle manner, until his sister arrived to complain. Harriet might bear too large a brood. Each rejection solidified Harriet's sense that Redwood Bluff would not easily accept her. Seeking solace, she took early morning walks to the outskirts of town. From a gentle rise, she could see Redwood Bluff spread out below the spire of the small church, the square roof of the Mercantile, the stables near the station. Beyond lay open fields studded with mesquite, and in the distance, white fences belonging to the Hastings Ranch. Lyman's gossiping parlor chat had painted a vivid portrait of Cole Hastings, the ranch's owner, a man rumored to have carved his fortune from wild mustangs and unclaimed land. "He's no ordinary rancher," Miss Porter had opined one afternoon, her voice dripping with a mixture of envy and disapproval. "His herds are the best in 3 territories, and he invests in new breeding methods. But word is Cole Hastings is more wedded to his property than he'd ever be to a wife." Harriet had merely sipped her tea, vaguely curious, yet hardly expecting to meet a man so far removed from Redwood Bluff's daily bustle. Late one afternoon, Harriet was sitting on the porch mentally drafting a letter to her father about the fruitless efforts thus far when hoofbeats echoed against the wooden sidewalk. Glancing up, she found herself momentarily breathless. The rider approaching had the easy posture of someone who belonged on horseback. His mount, a gleaming roan, wore an unmistakable brand, a stylized H burned onto its flank. This was Cole Hastings, no doubt about it. Harriet watched him dismount outside the bank, catching a fleeting glimpse of broad shoulders under a dust-streaked jacket. He towered over the banker, Mr. Hardwick, who emerged hastily to greet him with uncharacteristic affability. Harriet heard only snatches of their conversation, something about a horse sale, a train arriving soon with Devonshire bloodlines. Then the sun flashed across Cole's face, revealing a pair of eyes that carried a quiet intensity. A moment later, those eyes flicked upward and met Harriet's from across the street. She tensed, expecting the usual fleeting glance of confusion or dismissal. Instead, Cole Hastings tipped his hat in a polite, almost friendly acknowledgement before returning his attention to Mr. Hardwick. That simple gesture set Harriet's heart racing for reasons she could not quite comprehend. That night, Harriet tried to dismiss the incident as a trivial courtesy. She was, after all, just a stranger perched on a porch. But she found herself replaying that image. His roan horse, the purposeful set of his shoulders. In the lightning brief moment, their gazes locked. Mrs. Lyman interrupted Harriet's introspection to say, Mr. Hastings has a reputation for finishing business quickly and rarely lingers in town. Folks say he can read a horse's temper at a glance and a man's character in a single handshake. Harriet half smiled in the lamplight. Then Redwood Bluff must fascinate him with all these hidden corners. The boarding house keeper gave a wry chuckle. Oh, I reckon Redwood Bluff has become too predictable for a man like that. He shows up, closes a deal, rides out. Sometimes I forget he's in his mid-30s. He's built his empire in less than a decade. None of this was Harriet's concern, she reminded herself. She had practical matters to attend to, namely that her funds would not stretch far beyond another week. The final dregs of her determination to stay flickered precariously, threatening to be snuffed out by the stares and whispers. Yet as she lay awake that night, listening to the hum of the summer insects, Harriet found her thoughts drifting to that unexpected tilt of a hat and the quiet acknowledgement in a stranger's eyes. At dawn the next day, Harriet ventured to the train station on a whim. She was restless, drawn by curiosity about this Devonshire stallion rumored to arrive. Though Redwood Bluff men might cast sidelong glances at her, Harriet's knowledge of horses had never failed her confidence. She recalled summers in Vermont assisting her uncle, who trained fine carriage mounts. She could read a horse's posture as well as any man, a skill that once gave her deep satisfaction. Sure enough, not long after Harriet arrived, a piercing whistle signaled the train's approach. Steam billowed along the tracks as workers began unloading freight, including a tall, spirited stallion bearing a traveling harness. Harriet observed from a short distance, noting how the horse's conformation suggested strong hindquarters and the sloping shoulder of a well-bred line. However, it shifted its weight oddly. Something might be off with the left hind leg. Before she could approach closer, someone else stepped forward, Cole Hastings. He handed the station master a folded note, presumably verifying his purchase. Harriet realized she had no business interfering. She was just a bystander. Yet a pang of regret gnawed at her. She could likely save him from purchasing a horse that needed more care than a casual glance might reveal. She hovered indecisively, then turned to go, but caught Cole watching her out of the corner of his eye. With surprising gentleness, he asked, "Do you know horses?" Harriet hesitated, but the earnestness in his tone drew her. "A bit," she admitted. "Enough to see your new stallion might be favoring his hind leg." A flicker of surprise crossed Cole's face. He glanced back at the horse as if reevaluating. "Show me," he said simply. That direct approach startled Harriet, yet she stepped closer, ignoring the watchful gaze of the railroad workers. She ran her hand gently down the stallion's leg, feeling for heat or swelling. Her fingertips detected a subtle thickening near the cannon bone. "Could be minor," she mused aloud, "but a month of rest might do wonders before serious training." Cole nodded, absorbing her verdict. His posture relaxed as though relieved that someone saw the same details he did. "My foreman usually helps with these evaluations," he explained quietly, "but I wanted to see for myself." He paused, a trace of curiosity lighting his eyes. "You must be Harriet Baker. The folks at Mrs. Lyman's boarding house speak of you." Harriet bit her lip, bracing herself for the usual jabs or pity. "Yes, that's me. The aspiring mail-order bride who hasn't found a single taker." A softness around Cole's mouth suggested he recognized her sarcasm without condoning it. "I only heard that you arrived hoping for new beginnings," he replied calmly. "Listen, if you have an eye for horseflesh, I could use your help selecting a stable for him in town, or we could ride back to my ranch. Either way, I'd welcome your opinion. Mrs. Lyman's breakfasts usually end around 700, and I'm leaving for the ranch at 800 tomorrow. Will you join me?" Harriet stared in momentary disbelief. This was a straightforward invitation from a man Redwood Bluff described as self-reliant and aloof. She searched his expression for mockery, found none. A swirl of emotions threatened her composure. I suppose, so she managed at last. Cole exhaled as though pleased she'd agreed. Then I'll see you after breakfast tomorrow. I'll bring a horse you can ride. We'll check out the condition of this stallion on my property. He tipped his hat, stepping aside for the workers to move the horse off the platform. Left behind in the swirl of dust and swirling steam, Harriet felt the eyes of the town once more. Yet she also felt something different, a spark of confidence flickering to life, fueled not by admiration of her figure or her domestic graces, but by respect for her knowledge. She turned back toward the boarding house, the corners of her mouth lifting in a smile. No matter what Redwood Bluff whispered, Harriet felt a renewed sense of purpose. Harriet's heart hammered as she rose before sunrise, carefully choosing a simple yet sturdy riding skirt and a blouse that allowed for movement. She braided her hair tightly, determination seeping into every motion. Over breakfast, Miss Porter fluttered her eyelids in mild scandal. "Surely you're not going out riding alone with Mr. Hastings?" Harriet answered calmly that it was an invitation to assess a horse. "Nothing more, Mrs." Lyman offered her a subtle, supportive grin, clearly sensing there was more at stake. Right on time, the thunder of hooves echoed on the dusty street outside. Harriet stepped onto the porch to find Cole Hastings astride a handsome sorrel mare, the city's early light reflecting off well-kept tack. Next to him stood another horse, a bay with alert eyes saddled and waiting. Harriet approached with the same innate calm she had shown as a girl in Vermont stables. Gently patting the bay's shoulder, she murmured a greeting. Cole dismounted to assist, offering a hand. Harriet found herself accepting with minimal embarrassment. "Don't worry about what anyone in town says," he remarked softly as though reading her concerns. She nodded once, mounted the bay, and together they rode out of Redwood Bluff, ignoring the curious stares. Once the town's buildings shrank behind them, Harriet relaxed. The rolling grasslands spread in a golden tapestry beneath the expansive sky. She inhaled the crisp air laced with the tang of mesquite and distant sage. The sense of openness revived a long-dormant part of her soul. Cole led them along a creek bed, explaining that the stallion they'd collected from the train was a Devonshire line known for intelligence and stamina. "I was raised around horses," Harriet volunteered, gesturing to the landscape, "though not in terrain like this. My uncle in Vermont taught me everything from grooming to gentling spooked colts." Cole responded with keen interest, asking about specific training techniques. Harriet found herself describing halter-breaking procedures, hoof care regimens, and ways to handle timid or headstrong horses. He listened attentively, occasionally adding comments about how the dryness of Texas might differ from Vermont's damp climate. She felt surprisingly at ease, as though they were peers rather than a wealthy rancher and a job-seeking newcomer. As they crested a low ridge, Cole halted, pointing across the plain. Harriet's breath caught. A sprawling ranch lay before them, immaculate white fences demarcating wide pastures. Multiple barns stood in neat rows with stable roofs that glinted in the morning sun. Here and there, ranch hands moved among the horses, their tasks a ballet of collaboration. At the heart of it all, a large stone house rose, not ostentatious, but clearly built to last. "This is Hastings Ranch," Cole said, turning in the saddle to gauge her reaction. Harriet offered a slow smile. "It's beautiful and bigger than I imagined." They continued down the slope, soon greeted by an older foreman named Ike Williams. His kind, weathered face creased in a grin when Cole introduced Harriet, acknowledging her skill with horses. Ike gave her a respectful nod. "Always need more good horse sense around here. Pleasure to meet you, miss." Within the hour, Harriet found herself thoroughly involved in the ranch routine. She examined the Devonshire stallion's gait, confirming her earlier observation that his left hind was slightly strained. She advised moderate walks for a fortnight, a regimen of rinsing the leg after each session, and minimal forced exercise until healing was certain. Ike watched her demonstration closely and offered no condescension. Her knowledge evidently impressed him. Cole took her on a brief tour of the main barn, introducing her to a series of broodmares heavy with foal. Harriet marveled at the careful breeding records pinned neatly by each stall. To her surprise, he asked for her opinion about feeding programs, noting that some of the new broodmares came from stock that thrived on different grass mixtures. Harriet gave her input inwardly, astounded that he treated her as a partner in decision-making. They reconvened by a corral leaning against the fence while a spirited Mustang trotted behind the rails. Harriet's cheeks glowed from hours in the sun and wind, yet she felt more alive than she had in months. She glanced sideways at Cole, who was quietly regarding her. "You have a knack for noticing details," he remarked. "Plenty of folks handle horses, but few read them like you do." She was about to respond when a ranch hand rushed over a filly in the north pasture was acting strangely. Possibly colic, Cole pivoted at once, calling for Harriet to follow. Together they examined the filly, diagnosing a mild digestive upset. Harriet realized they worked in perfect tandem. No wasted words, each trusting the other's instincts. The foreman's respect mirrored Cole's own, and Harriet felt a surge of belonging, a sense that Redwood Bluff might offer more than fleeting acceptance. She left that evening with a swirl of thoughts. Cole escorted her back to town, ensuring the ride was comfortable. When they parted ways outside Mrs. Lyman's, Harriet felt a reluctance to let the day end. Yet a small, persistent voice whispered caution. Redwood Bluff had shown her cold shoulders before. Perhaps she was fooling herself. Still, she found hope stirring with each memory of Cole's unwavering gaze, of her hands calming skittish horses with gentle authority, and of the ranch that bustled like a living testament to what a determined soul could build. Within 2 weeks, Harriet established a tentative routine. At dawn, she saddled a horse Cole lent her, an even-tempered buckskin named Breezy, and rode out to Hastings Ranch. By mid-morning, she might be assisting Ike in the foaling barn, or guiding a young stable hand on better grooming techniques. The hush that once followed her around Redwood Bluff began to morph into a guarded respect. A few ranchers who had snubbed her in social settings now eyed her with admiration whenever she demonstrated a knack for halter training or diagnosing a limps. Harriet felt the sting of gossip. One afternoon, while returning a borrowed grooming brush to the mercantile, she overheard a snide remark. "He's just pitying her, that's all. Cole Hastings is too polite to say no." The words stung. Harriet forced herself to ignore them, reminding herself how Cole treated her, not like a project of sympathy, but like an equal. Her bond with the horses deepened day by day. The spirited Mustang, ironically named Clover, now followed Harriet around the corral after she spent hours gentling it with soft words and consistent cues. The yearlings recognized her voice. Ike once joked she was the ranch's new horse whisperer. Yet Harriet remained cautious around Cole. Attraction lingered between them, tangible as the Texas wind. At times their eyes met across a stall, and an understanding passed with no words needed. She recalled how on her second day Cole had guided her around a skittish mare and lightly touched her hand to direct her out of harm's way. Her pulse had pounded loud enough to match the mare's hoofbeats. Yet Harriet told herself it was the thrill of working with horses that quickened her heart, not the slow smiles Cole bestowed when he thought no one was watching. As Redwood Bluff's wagging tongues kept pace, Harriet found an unexpected ally, the widow Chen, who ran a local laundry. One evening, Harriet ventured in with a bundle of stable-soiled garments. The widow offered Harriet a shy, encouraging smile, then pressed a small packet of herbal ointment into Harriet's hands for calloused palms. "Good for horse lovers," she said softly, as though she too recognized Harriet's dedication. The gesture warmed Harriet's spirit. Not everyone in town viewed her with suspicion, but tension struck one afternoon when Harriet helped calm a fractious stallion during a sudden storm. As lightning fractured the sky, she guided the stallion away from a collapsing fence, her skirt muddy from the downpour. She managed to keep it from bolting, though it reared dangerously. In the chaos, Cole arrived face-etched with alarm. Seeing Harriet risking life and limb, he called her name in a tone that resonated with a deeper worry. Once the stallion was secured, Harriet realized Cole's hands still trembled against her elbows as he checked if she was injured. "You could have been hurt," he murmured. Eyes fierce in the rain, Harriet, soaked to the bone, simply replied, "I couldn't let him break a leg." For a moment, their surroundings melted away. She glimpsed a raw vulnerability in Cole, something unguarded, a confession of how much he cared. Then Ike shouted about the North Paddock flooding, and the moment fractured, Harriet and Cole parted to deal with the next crisis. Yet Harriet carried the memory of Cole's urgent tone and the fire in his eyes when he grasped her arms. When the storm finally passed, Redwood Bluff's rumor mill churned anew. Harriet Baker was either too brazen for a lady or too clever to remain single. Some claimed she was forging a marriage of convenience, while others accused her of angling for Cole's wealth. Harriet tried to push such nonsense aside, focusing on horses and her father's next letter, which described his declining health. But each whispered slight chipped at her resolve. She asked herself repeatedly if Cole's attention stemmed from genuine admiration or that dreaded pity. Yet whenever they locked eyes over a stable gate or conferred quietly about a horse's feeding schedule, Harriet sensed something beyond sentiment, a slow-building, honest respect. If pity was involved, it didn't mirror the warmth in his gaze or the steady strength of his presence. Late in her third week at the ranch, Harriet was lunging a Devonshire mare when young Jimmy, one of the ranch hands, galloped in from Redwood Bluff with news. Gasping for breath, he brandished a telegram addressed to Harriet. Fear clenched her heart as she read it. Her father's condition had worsened. The doctor wrote a few remaining treatment options, hinting that time was short. Harriet felt the ground tilt beneath her. For a moment, the comforting routine of ranch life evaporated. She was no longer Harriet Baker building a new life in Redwood Bluff. She was just a daughter terrified for her father's fragile existence. Cole discovered her slumped against a fence post. The telegram crumpled in her hand. When he gently asked, "Tell me," Harriet explained in a shaky voice that she needed to go back east. Her mother's letter pleaded for Harriet's return, both for emotional support and any financial relief Harriet could muster. Cole's eyes shadowed with concern. "Let me help you," offered. "We can hire a doctor, send money, whatever they need." Harriet swallowed a sob. It wouldn't be enough. He might only have months, maybe weeks. "I have to be there," she added more quietly. "I came west to secure a marriage that could pay for his care. But I failed at that, and now failed." Cole's voice held an incredulous note. "How can you say that? You've transformed this ranch's training regimen." Harriet recognized the fierce protectiveness that flared in his expression, and it nearly undid her. But her logic remained grim. Seamstress work in Boston might not pay the bills. But it's something. If I hurry back, maybe I can salvage money for a final attempt at care. She toyed bitterly with the notion of Mr. Oliver's proposal. He had visited once more, politely reaffirming that if Harriet needed to marry for stability, he was an option. She had dismissed him initially, but faced with her father's mortality, Harriet was half tempted. They parted that day in silence, Cole outwardly collected but eyes revealing heartbreak. Harriet spent the evening at Mrs. Lyman's reading the telegram again and again, her confusion mounting. Guilt tore at her. Redwood Bluff had begun to feel like home, especially at the ranch where she found purpose and acceptance. Yet how could she remain while her father's life ebbed away hundreds of miles east? The following morning, Harriet began packing her sparse belongings. She wrote a note to her mother that she was en route, though she left the envelope unsealed, uncertain how to phrase her regrets. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, a woman once brimming with optimism, now undone by sorrow and a sense of obligation. She'd discovered more than she bargained for in Redwood Bluff, but her father needed her late that afternoon. Cole rode up to the boarding house. Harriet answered the door, her trunk half filled behind her. They exchanged tense greetings, both ignoring the watchers who craned their necks to see the drama unfold. Mrs. Lyman discreetly retreated, giving them the front parlor's privacy. Without preamble, Cole spoke. "Harriet, you can't do this alone. Let me finance proper treatment. If your father can't travel, we'll bring specialists to him." Harriet's throat tightened. "I appreciate it truly, but no arrangement can fix a father's heartbreak if I never come home. It's not just about money." She hesitated, eyes brimming with unshed tears. "It's also about my duty." Cole gripped the brim of his hat, knuckles whitening. "Are we not allowed to want more than duty?" He stopped himself, voice cracking on an emotion Harriet both dreaded and yearned to hear. "I can't lose you to a burden you shouldn't face alone." She shook her head, half choked by sorrow. "Cole, it's not just about me. My mother is near collapse. If I don't go now, I may never see my father awake again." A hush fell, each second pressing on Harriet's heart like an anvil. Finally, Cole uttered, "Then I'll drive you to the station tomorrow." Harriet nodded numbly. She saw the flicker of pain behind his stoicism, recognized it mirrored in her own chest. With a heavy tread, Cole departed. Harriet stared after him, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. The next day would lead her away from Redwood Bluff's dust and sunlight, and from Cole Hastings' silent devotion. She tried to pray for clarity, but felt only the ache of a path that forced her to break something precious, the fragile bond they'd nurtured without naming. The morning Harriet was to leave, a frantic pounding on Mrs. Lyman's front door jolted her from a restless doze. She hurried downstairs, finding young Jimmy once again, breathless and wide-eyed. "There's trouble at Hastings Ranch," he gasped. "One of the Devonshire stallions is down with colic. No vet in town and Mr. Hastings away in Fort Worth." Without hesitation, Harriet dropped her travel coat and snatched up her medical kit from the trunk. The very trunk she'd intended to haul to the station an hour later. Mrs. Lyman offered an imploring look, but Harriet's determination was already set. If a horse was in danger, Harriet had the knowledge to help, and Redwood Bluff had no veterinarian until next week. Moments later, Harriet found herself in a borrowed buggy racing toward Hastings Ranch. The day was crisp, the sky an unwavering blue that mocked the tension coiling in her stomach. Ike met her at the ranch gates, relieved but trembling with anxiety. He's a prime stallion, spent a fortune acquiring him from back east. We can't lose him. Harriet forced calm into her voice as they reached the stall. The stallion lay on his side, kicking at his stomach. Classic signs of severe colic. Harriet knelt beside him, ignoring the swirl of stable hands that hovered. Get him up slowly, she ordered. He mustn't roll. She guided them, prescribing intervals of walking to ease the pressure, a mild sedation if available, and warm water to soothe the stomach. Time-blurred Harriet found herself covered in sweat, manure and dust, issuing instructions with a quiet authority that no one questioned. Ike and two others worked in shifts to keep the stallion upright. Harriet administered a carefully measured dose of medication from her kit, praying it would stave off the worst. At some point, she heard hooves thunder into the ranch yard. Cole's voice cut through the commotion. What's happening? Harriet spotted him pushing through the crowd. His jacket flapped open, dust from a hasty ride still coating his boots. He froze upon seeing Harriet. She briefly explained the steps they'd taken, the timeline of medication and the precarious balance the stallion remained in. Cole took one look at the animal, then at Harriet. Without further words, he joined the rotation of hands, pulling on ropes, coaxing the stallion to keep moving. Harriet noticed Cole's lips pressed tight each time the horse stumbled, as if he feared the beast's demise would mark an end to more than just an investment. Hours crawled by. The scorching sun gave way to an orange-lavender horizon. Then dusk settled in. At last, as night claimed the sky, the stallion showed signs of improvement, a lessened heart rate, calmer breathing, and no attempts to roll. Harriet, exhausted, slumped against a bale of hay, dazed with relief. Someone pressed a cup of water into her hand. She drank gratefully, then looked up at Cole, kneeling beside her. You've saved him, he murmured, voice brimming with thankfulness. Harriet's eyes closed, tears trickling down her cheeks, unbidden. This might only be a reprieve. He'll need gentle walking all night, she mumbled. Cole touched her shoulder. I'll do it. Ike and the boys, too. You rest. Only then did Harriet remember her scheduled train, the trunk left behind at Mrs. Lyman's. She'd missed her departure, a realization that sent a jolt through her weariness. She tried to stand, fumbled for words. I have to. There was a train. My father. Cole steadied her with a hand at her elbow. We'll talk, Harriet, but first you need to rest. You've been at this for over 12 hours. I'll see to the horse. Reluctance warred with her body's screaming exhaustion. Harriet let him help her into the ranch house, where a kindly housekeeper named Mrs. Gonzalez bustled her into a spare bedroom. Harriet collapsed onto the bed, every muscle aching. Before sleep took her, she felt Cole slip into the room, laying a blanket gently over her. A quiet warmth pulsed through Harriet's heart, the final thought that maybe she was exactly where she needed to be. Morning found Harriet stirring from the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks. Outside the window, a faint glow revealed the ranch, slowly waking hands, fetching water. Roosters, crowing horses, stirring in the corral. Harriet sat up abruptly, remembering the reason she was here. She scrambled out of bed, still in yesterday's stained riding clothes, her hair in disarray. She quickly splashed water on her face in the adjoining washroom. On unsteady legs, she rushed to the barn, expecting disaster. Instead, she found the Devonshire stallion standing calmly nibbling at hay. Ike, dark circles under his eyes, offered a weary grin. He's out of the woods, thanks to you. Harriet exhaled, nearly collapsing with relief. A shuffle behind her heralded Cole's arrival, also looking haggard but sporting a smile. He seems good. Cole reported, patting the stallion's flank. We walked him every couple hours. No sign of relapse. Harriet nodded, pressing her lips together to keep from crying in relief. Then reality sank its claws in. She'd missed her train, her father was ill, and her mother's letter was urgent. Harriet found Cole's gaze resting on her sympathy and something deeper reflecting in his eyes. Jimmy rode to Redwood Bluff at dawn, he said, as if sensing her worry. He sent a wire to the telegraph office in Boston explaining your delay. We can arrange for the next train in a few days. A swirl of emotions overcame Harriet. Guilt for missing the train, gratitude for the horse's survival, anguish over her father's condition. She stepped out of the stall, clasping her hands to steady them. I must still go, she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. But your horse needed me. Cole leaned against the barn door, arms folded. And if your father needs you, how can I keep you? Harriet, I understand duty, but I also believe in solutions that don't require you to lose everything you've built here. She whipped around, tears brimming. Solutions my father's in Boston, possibly nearing the end, reliant on a doctor who says it's a matter of time. My mother's alone and I'm just a woman with no fortune of my own, no husband to help me. My plan was to marry for security, but the last words hung like a question neither dared speak. Cole's expression turned pain. Would you truly marry another man just for your father's sake? She gave a helpless shrug. Mr. Oliver offered a measure of stability. My father's medical bills are enormous. Father might linger on for months or years. I can't stand the thought of him dying in debt. Cole's voice grew taut. I can cover the bills, Harriet. This ranch can cover them. Let me help. That offer sliced through Harriet's heart, 'cause it mirrored every yearning she had. No, she croaked. I won't let you do that out of pity or obligation. You owe me nothing. Cole's mouth tightened. He stepped forward, grasped her hands. Owe you, Harriet, He paused, frustration in his eyes as if grappling for the right words. What if it's neither pity nor obligation? What if I just want you here with me? Her chest constricted, tears finally slipping free. She wanted that more than she'd admit, but fear strangled her response. The hush between them stretched, then a sudden voice interrupted. Ike popped his head around the barn door, apologetic. Boss, we've got some visitors in the yard. They're insisting on seeing Miss Harriet. Harriet wiped her cheeks, bracing herself. Visitors, she echoed. Cole's face hardened, probably Redwood. Bluff busybodies. They walked together out of the barn, finding a delegation that included Mr. Hardwick, the banker, Miss Porter, the school teacher, and a couple of townspeople who often hovered around gossip. Harriet's heart sank at the disapproving scowls on their faces. Mr. Hardwick cleared his throat, launching into a prepared speech. Miss Baker, rumors abound that you've become some sort of live-in caretaker at Hastings Ranch. We're concerned for your virtue, Miss Porter added self-righteously. We know you initially came seeking a husband, but these actions staying overnight, involving yourself intimately in ranch affairs are not the ways of a decent lady. Cole's temper flared visibly, but Harriet placed a hand on his arm, stepping forward to face them herself. I am simply caring for a sick horse, she said, measured but firm. Circumstances demanded immediate attention. As for my personal choices, they are none of Redwood Bluff's business. A few of them exchanged uneasy glances. Miss Porter pressed on. Your father's ill in Boston, is he not? Yet you remain here in questionable conditions. Harriet's resolve, already shredded by the night's emotional toll, threatened to snap, but she inhaled, recalling Cole's silent vow of support. Yes, my father is ill, Harriet said, controlling the quiver in her voice. I missed the train because saving a valuable stallion took precedence. At that moment, I will manage both my family's crisis and my own destiny without Redwood Bluff's condescension. If that scandalizes you, so be it, Mr. Hardwick blustered. We only wish to ensure the dignity of our community, a young woman carrying on so brazenly. Enough, Cole interjected, to voice like thunder. Harriet Baker has more dignity and courage in her little finger than your entire committee. If Redwood Bluff can't recognize that it's Redwood Bluff's loss. His gaze swept over them, leaving no room for argument. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do. The group, cowed by Cole's commanding presence, retreated still. Murmuring, Harriet stood rigid until they vanished beyond the ranch gates. Then sagged against the fence. She felt Cole's arms settle around her shoulders. I'm sorry you have to endure that, he murmured. Harriet's exhaustion and heartbreak threatened to drag her under, but she clung to the fact that for now she wasn't facing it alone. After that confrontation, Harriet felt a curious calm. She had weathered Redwood Bluff's scorn, saved a horse's life, and confronted her own fears about returning home. Now the only question was how to reconcile all these truths. She spent one final night at Hastings Ranch, scribbling letters, one to her father, apologizing for the delay, but reassuring him that help was coming, and one to Mr. Oliver, declining his generous proposal. In the morning, Cole arrived at the bunkhouse door with a folded telegram. He extended it silently, something like hope glimmering in his eyes. Harriet opened it with shaking fingers. Thomas Baker, stable sold 5 years ago to one. Cole Hastings, full record shows philanthropic pricing, father stable enough for potential travel. Doctors suggest rest, more to come. Harriet reread the lines, confusion swirling. Cole Hastings purchased my father's stable. Is that the same stable we had in Vermont? Her pulse hammered memories colliding the accident that shattered her father's ability to run Baker stables, the forced sale Harriet had never known who the buyer was. Only that it was rumored to be a wealthy rancher from the West. She looked at Cole in shock. You bought my father's stable, he nodded, face solemn. I had no idea you were connected at first. The name Baker is common enough. I realized only after you mentioned Vermont and described certain training methods your uncle taught you. They matched details I'd heard from the stable's former workers. So I asked my banker for records. He inhaled. Your father's stable had the finest breeding lines I'd ever seen. I wanted to expand east, but your father's injury derailed his ability to manage it. Harriet's eyes filled with tears. All this time, I never knew. We lost everything. He refused to stay as a manager, too proud, and we ended up in Boston. Cole's expression wavered between regret and determination. I tried. I offered him a role. Better medical coverage, but he wouldn't accept. I couldn't force him. The stable is still under partial operation, but it's never thrived without his expertise. Hurt gratitude and unresolved tension warred in Harriet's heart. Had Cole inadvertently caused her father's downfall? Or had he rescued them from total ruin? Her father never spoke ill of the buyer, only the heartbreak of losing his life's work. Harriet's hands trembled. You asked Redwood Bluff to investigate further, but why keep it a secret from me? Cole ran a hand through his hair. I feared you'd think I manipulated events, especially with Redwood Bluff, gossiping about me. I planned to tell you once I found a way to restore some share to your father. I still do. Harriet let me bring your parents here, help them settle on the ranch, or reacquire parts of the stable, so it's truly in Baker's hands again. The magnitude of his offer overwhelmed her. Cole was not just an accidental savior. He wanted to mend a wound that Harriet's family had carried for years. She recalled Redwood Bluff's cynicism, but saw in Cole's earnest gaze an honest desire to right past wrongs, to share his fortune with the woman he did. He loved her. Harriet's heart soared at the possibility. Her father's stable had ironically linked them long before they met, weaving a tapestry of loss and hope. Harriet felt tears spill as she realized she could stay in Redwood Bluff and still care for her parents. It's not pity, is it? She asked softly, trembling with the final ounce of vulnerability. Cole's answer was immediate. Never, Harriet Baker. You're the bravest, most capable person I've met. I can't let you vanish from my life, not when it's so clear we belong together. He stepped closer, resting a gentle hand on her cheek. Marry me, let's join your father's stable with Hastings Ranch. We'll bring your mother here to rest, and your father can oversee breeding lines with you. Let me stand beside you as your partner. In everything. A sob of relief escaped Harriet as she met his gaze. There it was, the resolution she'd feared would never come, Redwood Bluff might whisper. But Harriet realized that she owed no one any justification beyond her heart's truth. Nodding, she whispered, yes. Cole pulled her into his arms, the dusty bunkhouse corridor suddenly dissolving into a swirl of promise. Outside, a stable hand whooped in delight as the news spread. Redwood Bluff might or might not celebrate, but Harriet had discovered her place, a place where love recognized her deeper worth and duty to her family, blended seamlessly with the new life she'd built among the wide skies and rolling plains of Texas. Over the following weeks, Harriet handled the logistics of bringing her parents to Redwood Bluff. Cole made good on his word, arranging private rail travel to accommodate her father's condition. Harriet waited anxiously at the station on the day of their arrival, her heart thrumming with a mixture of joy and trepidation. But when she saw her father step gingerly onto the platform, leaning on a cane, yet upright, relief flooded her. Lucy Baker bustled forward, her eyes lighting up at seeing Harriet. Tears and embraces abounded. The wedding itself unfolded under the bright Texas sun in the orchard near the main ranch house. Harriet wore a simple white dress with silver thread that caught the morning light. Redwood Bluff turned out in force, whether from genuine well-wishing or sheer curiosity. Harriet couldn't be sure. Miss Porter dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, murmuring apologies for past judgments. The widow Chen gave Harriet a small red pouch for good fortune. Even Mr. Hardwick appeared stiffly, offering best wishes. Harriet's father stood with careful pride, a sign that while he couldn't walk far, he had enough strength to join in the ceremony. Lucy wept quietly, her tears of relief mingling with Harriet's own. When Harriet spoke her vows, she looked into Cole's steady gaze and felt the ground under her feet as solid as the ranch's foundation. Later, as guests drifted away and the golden hour cast long shadows over the ranch, Harriet and Cole strolled hand in hand. In the paddock, the Devonshire stallion grazed contentedly, healthy thanks to Harriet's intervention. We did it, Harriet said softly, pressing closer to Cole's side. He kissed her temple, voice thick with emotion. No, you did it. You turned Redwood Bluff's contempt into respect. You saved that stallion, and now your family has a future here. Harriet smiled, recalling the scornful eyes and the way Redwood Bluff whispered about her appearance. None of that mattered now. She'd forged a partnership both in life and in ranching that overshadowed society's shallow measures of worth. The stable inherited from her father would merge with Cole's empire, forming a new legacy of breeding and training excellence. As Harriet's father regained his footing, she would share with him that the ranch was as much his dream as it was Cole's gazing over the rolling fields. Harriet felt the hush of twilight. A gentle breeze caught the edges of her gown, and she closed her eyes, cherishing the warmth of Cole's arm around her waist. Once she had come to Redwood Bluff, uncertain of everything, her future, her ability to find a partner who saw past her figure. Now she stood certain that love built on mutual respect and genuine compassion could transcend any boundary. The day's last rays turned the horizon into a palette of orange and pink, echoing Harriet's quiet elation. She curled her fingers around Cole's, whispering, "I'm finally home." In that breath, the wide Texas sky seemed to embrace them both, a silent testament to second chances and enduring hope. Looking back, I see how far I've come since the day I stepped off that train, wrapped in my own doubts and the town's harsh judgments. I thought I was there to secure financial stability for my ailing father, never imagining I'd find the kind of acceptance and partnership that money couldn't buy. Working with those horses taught me resilience in a way I never understood before. And building a life with a man who values my strengths just as I value his has given me a sense of belonging I've craved all my life. Thank you for sharing in my journey. I'd love to hear which moments resonated with you most. Do you think Harriet and Cole's story could inspire others to overcome their own self-doubts or societal pressures? Drop a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that remind us love and courage can flourish even in the most unexpected places.